the speakers have gone, we will then have time for the question and answer portion. We will take as many questions as we can in the time that, we have, in the limited time that we have. Also note that this press conference is being recorded. And so if you need the link to this press conference after the fact, you can reach out to our media email, and that should be included in the media advisory that you were sent Friday and again this morning. So first, we will begin with.
Thank you, Christy, and good afternoon, all. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Hendrickson. I am our government relations strategist. From Amarillo to Brownsville and Beaumont to El Paso, Texans deserve a state government that addresses all of our needs, including access to affordable health care, high-quality public schools, and a reliable power grid. Governor Abbott's State of the State included some common sense solutions to these challenges facing our state, such as structure. While we encourage him to focus on issues like these that will build a better future for all of us, unfortunately, his speech also included dangerous and divisive and dishonest rhetoric to endorse discriminatory policies that would harm our families, friends, and neighbors, weaken our communities, and distract Texans from the common goals that unite us. Governor Abbott repeatedly contradicted himself or failed to address key parts of solving the problems he identified. He stated that helping families means improving health care for Texans, but did not address the need to restore access to reproductive health care in our state. Governor Abbott boasted about the state being #1 in the country for Tier 1 research universities, but then went on to push for further restrictions on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at universities that would have a negative impact on their ability to recruit professors and secure research grants. He claimed that we needed to recruit, support, and retain the best teachers for our public schools, shortly before falsely accusing them of indoctrinating our children with woke agendas and threatening to fire any teacher who merely acknowledges the existence of trans students, let alone supports them. The governor expressed support for the Trump administration's immigration policies. In contrast to the Biden administration policies, he claimed made his cruel and unconstitutional actions under Operation Lone Star necessary. But he continues to seek billions in state funding that could be used for the state's many, many more pressing needs to continue to fund immigration enforcement by the state. And despite lauding Texas's business-friendly climate, he went on to advocate for xenophobic policies that prevent foreign citizens from purchasing land in the state. Time and time again, Governor Abbott demonstrated that his policy priorities do not serve the needs of all Texans. We deserve better. Regarding elections, Governor Abbott endorsed policies preventing non-citizens from registering to vote and restoring Ken Paxton's ability to prosecute election crimes. What Governor Abbott failed to in our state. What's more, he also failed to acknowledge that the proposed solutions to require proof of citizenship for registration will make it substantially harder for all Texans to register to vote, create a massive administrative burden for election officials, and result in expensive litigation regarding a system that is a manufactured problem. The state should be focused on modernizing and streamlining our voter registration system by enacting online registration or automatic voter registration, increasing the accuracy of the voter rolls, reducing costs for local governments, and making it easier for eligible Texans to participate in our elections. We also oppose restoring the AG's ability to prosecute election crimes, which the Texas courts have found violate the state constitution, increasing the threat of criminal prosecution for Texans exercising their civic duty, despite the lack of evidence of voter fraud, voters, and restrict local control of election administration. We should encourage all eligible Texans to vote free of the fear that they will be subject to criminal penalties for casting a vote.
Our next speaker will be Nick Hudson.
Thank you, Christy. My name is Nick Hudson. I'm a senior manager of policy and advocacy at the ACLU of Texas. I am going to address the governor's comments on bail last night. And Governor Abbott's comments ignored both the Constitution and the reality that Texas's bail system already keeps tens of thousands of bail last night. This is an extreme and unconstitutional proposal to automatically jail large numbers of Texans based only on a mere accusation without giving people the opportunity to defend themselves or requiring that the government first prove its case. And just be very clear. Our Constitution is rooted in the principles of freedom and fairness when people face accusations by the government, and the government must meet a high bar before jailing somebody before they've been convicted of anything. And so any law or amendment that automatically jails people based only on the charges filed would be plainly unconstitutional. It would lock up people before trial without allowing a judge to consider their situation, the details of their case, or whether they're likely to return to court. And I just want to say the core problem with Texas' bail system is that release is based on access to resources, not safety. If you are wealthy, you are free to go before trial. If you aren't, you sit in jail, sometimes for months or years. And our cash bail system undermines both safety, it undermines the safety of arrested individuals, the broader community. It erodes the presumption of innocence in our state. It leads to racially and economically disparate jailing. And it drains economic resources primarily from families and communities of color. And so we'll say we need common sense improvements to our bail system that addresses its core problems. And most Texans agree that release before trial should be based on safety, not wealth, and that everybody should be treated the same no matter their race or income. Just a couple other points. You know, under our system today, as I mentioned, wealth is the primary factor that determines who gets released from jail. Jailing people for months on minor charges because they can't afford bail has been shown to, the system fuels both crime and poverty. Texas also spends hundreds of millions of dollars each year jailing people accused of minor offenses simply because they cannot afford bail. Much of that money goes towards detaining people who pose little risk, who will not be convicted, and who will have their cases dismissed. And instead of rolling up his sleeves to fix this issue, unfortunately, Governor Abbott proposed an extreme and unconstitutional change that would undermine the presumption of innocence, due process, and the rights and freedom of all Texans. So we will continue to work for a rational and balanced approach to pretrial detention and release. We need a system that minimizes unnecessary pretrial detention while maximizing public safety and court appearance through a fair and rational pretrial release process. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Our next speaker will be Chloe Kemp.
Thank you, Christy. My name is Chloe Kempf, and I'm a staff attorney at the ACLU of Texas, and I'll be speaking about Governor Abbott's anti-DEI and anti-LGBTQ rhetoric. First, genders, backgrounds, and religions must be free to learn about our history and empowered to come together to work for a Texas that works for all of us, no exceptions. But the governor last night presents a narrow version of Texas that suppresses historical truth, constrains academic freedom, and blocks pathways to a more equitable society. This vision represents a stark contrast to the governor's stated goal of making Texas a freer state. Certain politicians aim to stay in power and distract from governmental failings, EI, and anti-LGBTQ rhetoric to turn neighbors against each other or erode our democracy. Specifically, last night, the governor expressed a desire to eradicate diversity, equity, and inclusion programs from our public schools, colleges and universities, and more. And while the governor cited the state's excellent research universities and job growth as undermining public education will destroy our universities and weaken our workforce. Unfortunately, we have already seen how the state's anti-DEI efforts create atmospheres of fear, hostility, and censorship in Texas public colleges and universities. But we know that DEI programs are driven by the values of fairness and justice, and they seek to repair decades of entrenched discrimination that have excluded people of color, women, LGBTQ people, and people with disabilities from higher education and employment opportunities. The truth is, Anti-DEI efforts are the new frontier in an ongoing struggle against the systematic silencing and exclusion of marginalized voices. These anti-DEI efforts represent a concerted push to roll back hard-won progress, aim to reinforce existing power structures, and perpetuate the erasure of diverse perspectives. These efforts often target vulnerable Texas students. Certain politicians and their billionaire backers have already sought to censor classroom instruction on racism and sexism, ban books about the lives of LGBTQ people and people of color, roll back our fundamental academic freedoms, and indoctrinate our children with state-sponsored religion. But all Texas students, no matter their race, gender, or background, deserve a high-quality education that prepares them for their futures, and in an environment where they feel valued, safe, and respected. When state officials attack free speech and academic freedom and demand censorship in the classroom, they undermine the core of our democracy and put students and educators at risk. It is our responsibility to invest in education and ensure students have access to all the information they need to learn about themselves and the world around them. Finally, last night, the governor expressed a desire to fire any educator who affirms or even acknowledges their students' LGBTQ identities. This is a cruel escalation of Texas' existing attacks on transgender young people. State and local officials have already sought to target the health care they get and even the extracurricular activities they participate in. To state that there are only two sexes or two genders does not make it true. Intersex, transgender, and non-binary people have always existed and always will. And they deserve protection from discrimination in a Texas that will recognize, welcome, and support them. Thank you.
Thank you, Chloe. And now we'll have our final speaker, Attorney Edgar Saldivar.
Good afternoon. Migrant people reaching Texas are resilient families, including mothers, fathers, and children who brave perilous journeys across multiple countries, enduring harsh conditions and violence. They become vital in our communities, contributing to our thriving economy, our faith institutions, and our tax base. They are humble and hardworking and deserve equal dignity and respect, not political exploitation or criminalization. The governor presented a vision of Texas that is anti-immigrant, racist, and ultimately anti-democratic. It's a vision that goes against our values as Texans. Directing state agencies to assist the federal government in immigration enforcement and the further militarization of the border under the pretext of border security threatens our most basic civil and human rights as citizens and non-citizens alike. Our Constitution protects everyone from discrimination based on race, color, or national origin, regardless of immigration status. So long as you're on U.S. soil, every one of us is entitled to certain protections, including the right to be treated fairly in court, to free speech, and to other core civil rights. But as we've seen before, directing law enforcement agencies to target migrant people leads to racial profiling, the forced separation of families, including human and civil rights abuses in immigration detention centers, and increased surveillance and mistrust in communities of color. Escalating border militarization and federal state enforcement will inevitably trample civil rights and civil liberties. and it leads to massive misallocations of state taxpayer money. Contrary to what the state's manipulated data and self-serving statistics show, our report on Operation Lone Star reveals it has spent over $11 billion to racially profile and arrest people who pose no threat to public safety, overwhelmingly prosecuting U.S. citizens rather than migrants. Texans would prefer to spend our state funds on affordable health care, a reliable power grid, high-quality schools, better jobs, and a state that works for all of us. Simply put, there are more important things that we should be doing than getting in the business of separating families and putting kids in cages. Make no mistake, the governor's tactics mirror classic authoritarian tactics and strategies. Fabricating narratives, fostering an us versus them mentality, and employing inflammatory rhetoric to strip migrants of their humanity. Dog whistle references to non-existent invasions and imaginary enemies are designed to create division and a sense of crisis, portraying immigrants as threats to border security while eroding the foundations of a free society. The history of immigration in Texas began almost 500 years ago, in 1528, when the Karankawa people welcomed and provided refuge to a shipwrecked crew of Europeans who landed on the shores of Galveston. The governor's anti-immigrant agenda undermines our democracy and betrays our enduring values of friendship, family, and freedom, the very essence of Texas, a name rooted in the Caddo word for friend. Our organization has been fighting for the rights of all people in the Lone Star State since 1938, when we represented pecan shellers in San Antonio, including immigrant women who demanded humane treatment. And we will continue to work in the courts, in the legislature, and in our communities for a Texas that we can all believe in, where every person, regardless of the language you speak, the color of your skin, or the place you come from, can live with safety, dignity, and respect. Please visit our website, aclutx.org, to know your rights and support the ACLU. Thank you.
All right, so now we can begin taking questions. I see we have this first question in Spanish. So Edgar, I'll have you take that one. If you could read the question and then answer it.
Where is the question? Okay, here it is. ¿Qué peligros hay de usar la Guardia Nacional para arrestar a indocumentados? Ahora el gobierno de Texas así lo permite. So the question is, what are the dangers of using the National Guard to arrest undocumented people? The governor of Texas intends to do this. Bueno, para contestar la pregunta en español, los peligros son muy graves. Al ejercer la Guardia Nacional y agencias locales y estatales de policía para arrestar a gente indocumentada, va a resultar en la discriminación por perfil racial, va a resultar en la separación de familias, va a resultar en miedo y desconfianza en las autoridades, en las comunidades de color y las comunidades fronterizas. O sea que el peligro es muy serio. Hemos visto que los abusos contra los migrantes y personas de color resultan de estas interacciones entre policías de inmigración con gente que está buscando una mejor vida aquí. Entonces, nosotros vamos a estar al tanto de esos abusos y de esa discriminación para luchar contra eso.
Edgar, can I also have you kind of summarize what you said in English as well?
Yes. So to answer it in English, the question was about What are the dangers of employing the National Guard and other law enforcement agencies? And the dangers are very serious. We've seen that when these interactions occur, racial profiling happens. Abuses in detention happen. The separation of families happen. These are dangers that come from not having adequate training for law enforcement officers in immigration law, for applying a criminal posture to people seeking humanitarian relief. So the dangers are very real, and we're going to be on top of being vigilant of these abuses and being able to respond to them.
Okay, we have another question. It says, what issues should every Texan be watching at Ledge? Andrew, do you want to take this one?
Sure. I think a lot of the things we've mentioned already are on that list. I think, we're very concerned, particularly about the citizenship requirement for proof of citizenship requirement for voter registration. Many of the anti-DEI policies, which are sweeping and far-reaching. And I think, a lot of this also is we are looking at some of the issues that, were mentioned in sort of broad and vague terms. For example, on many of the DEI things that were measures that were mentioned last night, DEI is a poorly defined term as the governor used it. It's unclear exactly what the parameters are of what he would be intending to ban. And so, I think that's one of those things that we are very tuned in on in terms of curriculum and other issues. I think a number of other measures that we have seen in past sessions that also were not in the speech last night. Book bans in public schools, creating an election police force, further expanding the ability of state police to enforce immigration law, despite the fact that that is the federal government's purview, will all definitely be on our radar with a number of other things this session. So lots that we're monitoring for right now, for sure.
Okay, we also have another question. This one says, can you talk about the material difference between law enforcement relationships Abbott is talking about now versus the way in which Texas law enforcement worked with the feds prior to Trump's return to office? What makes this more serious or more intense now? Edgar, can you take this one?
Yes, to answer it simply is that the difference, the material difference is that it's going to be a lot more encompassing. It's going to be an all-encompassing effort by state agencies to engage in immigration enforcement. And by that, I mean, whereas before, in prior administrations, Texas agencies at the state level cooperated with the federal government upon request to engage in enforcement actions, often through agreements like 287G agreements. But this involved local law enforcement agencies at the state level, as well as DPS. Now, what the governor is intending is to enlist all agencies of the state to do this work with the federal government and partner in an effort that's going to be not just within the border regions and perhaps urban centers. It's going to extend through all parts and all corners of the state. So the risk is a lot more severe, that there's going to be a lot more interactions between police engaging in immigration enforcement and targeting people on the suspicion of being undocumented. And I emphasize that because the racial profiling element of this is going to be severe. How can you tell the difference between someone who is documented or undocumented. Under the state's, from the state standpoint, the darker the skin color, the greater the suspicion of criminality. So anyone who is Black or brown can be targeted by police and interrogated. And this is the real fear that we need to bring to light. This is the real risk to our civil liberties, because once they start coming after people of color with who they suspect of being undocumented, and it could include US citizens, then all our rights are at threat.
We have another question. Edgar, this one might also be for you. And it says, do you have a message to the immigrant community in the face of mass deportations?
Yes, I'll say the message in both English and Spanish to the community. First and foremost, you're not alone. Every one of us has rights, and organizations like the ACLU and many people across the state believe in a Texas that should be fair and equal to all, that should respect the human dignity of every person, including each one of you. Texas is and always has been a welcoming state. Texans have been welcoming from the very beginning, and we're going to continue to fight to make sure that Texas is a welcoming state for all. Now, what's going to be most important for the immigrant community right now is to know your rights. Know that you have rights against discrimination. Know that you have rights to remain silent. Please visit our website to know more of your rights. There are resources in many other organizations that are supporting this cause. Also, it's important to prepare for the possibility of family separation. So make a plan. Get in contact with family members, share contact information, figure out who's going to take care of your kids if you arrive home and or you don't arrive home due to an encounter with ICE. These are the kinds of questions that unfortunately we have to think about to prepare for injustices that may come. Ahora en español. Lo primero que debemos de saber es de que no estamos solos. Todos tenemos derechos. Todos tenemos derecho contra la discriminación, contra abusos. Y no estamos solos porque todos aquí en ACLU y en muchas organizaciones, incluso personas por todo el estado, creen en una visión de Texas que es inclusiva, que es justa, que cree en la igualdad y la justicia. Esa es la visión de Texas que nosotros representamos. Y eso es lo que vamos a luchar. Pero más importante que nada, por ahora, es conocer sus derechos. En nuestro sitio web aclutx.org pueden ver recursos de Conozca sus derechos y hagan un plan para la posible separación de familias. Hay riesgos de que interacciones con la policía para cómo van a cuidar a sus hijos si esto pasa, cómo van a proteger sus propiedades. Hagan plan para todo esto, pero por mientras, estudien, edúquense en sus derechos. Organizaciones como nosotros estamos aquí para servirles.
Thank you, Edgar. We have a question that says, we expect there to be protests at the Capitol again this year. What rights should protesters be aware of? Chloe, is this something that you can speak to?
Yes, of course. The right to protest is one of our most longstanding and fundamental freedoms in this country. It's protected by the United States and Texas constitutions. And it's encapsulated best in our, freedom to speak, exchange information with one another, and freedom to assemble to petition the government. But people should be aware that these rights are not unconditional. The government can regulate certain aspects of your protests and of your speech in general. So before you protest anywhere, but especially at the Capitol, it's important to familiarize yourself with the pre-existing rules and regulations around assembly and protests, and to make sure that you are in line with those rules. And that being said, the government isn't free to apply any rule that it would like. The rules have to be reasonable and also refrain from discriminating against certain speakers who have certain viewpoints on certain issues as well. And that's called content and viewpoint neutrality. For more information on protesters' rights, we have some Know Your Rights information on our website.
Thank you, Chloe. Are there any other questions? Anyone want to raise their hand or submit them to the Q&A function? I see Delinda Garcia, you have a question or a hand is raised. You can ask your question. You can come off mute to ask your question. Okay.
Hi.
Go for it.
Hi, this is Mara. I'm with Telemundo Network News. I sent a question for answer in Spanish and then in English. I'm going to say in Spanish. ¿Creen que cada vez va a haber más casos de migrantes, ciudadanos o residentes o indocumentados que son detenidos por perfil racial? Y ahora tendría la gente que estar llevando sus documentos para comprobar su estadía aquí en el país.
Muy buena pregunta y en nuestra opinión sí va a haber más incremento va a haber incremento en la discriminación por perfil racial y eso incluye no solo migrantes, sino también ciudadanos americanos o cualquier persona que se sospeche que sea indocumentado. Entonces, como expliqué anteriormente, la postura de las agencias locales es de que lo más oscuro que sea el color de tu piel, más sospecho ellos tienen de la criminalidad de uno. Entonces, sí es recomendable siempre, si hay dudas, traer sus documentos comprobantes de su estatus legal. Si tienen identificaciones, cárguenlas con sí mismo y estén preparados para todo. Nosotros vamos a estar al tanto de todo eso y vamos a seguir ser vigilantes para todo esto. And I'll say it in English too. The question was about, do we anticipate there's going to be an increase in racial profiling impacting not just migrants, but U.S. citizens and others? And we do believe that with the increased immigration enforcement and collaboration with the Trump administration, Texas agencies at the local and state level will engage in racial profiling. The nature of these laws and efforts to target immigrants and undocumented people is to go after people who are suspected of being undocumented, people who are suspected of quote unquote being here illegally. That suspicion is very problematic in that it can result in racial profiling simply by the way someone looks, by the way someone talks, by the way someone is dressed. And this is unconstitutional, and this is what we're going to be on the lookout for. But it is advisable for people who are concerned about this to carry your documentation. If you have legal status, make sure you have your IDs so that you are protected to the extent possible.
Hello, can you hear me? Well, thank you so much for this space. I want to take advantage. This is Laura Sepulveda from VOA News. Two specific questions, and I also want to make sure that we have the clearance to use this video for news purposes. If you can say that on camera as well, so we have the record of that. If you can answer in Spanish, that would be appreciated. So the first thing is, what is your opinion on the language that's being used by the government, specifically by the Secretary of National Security, when she talks about dirtbags and trash being removed of the streets, referring to the migrants? So what is your opinion about it? And also following up on the last question, what is the appropriate documentation to carry with you, having being a visa holder or being a resident or a citizen, knowing that there is not an official document in the United States that is recognized for.
Yes. Would you like me to answer that in English or Spanish or both?
If you can answer in Spanish, I appreciate it, and probably it would be useful for other people to have it in English as well.
Okay, fair enough. And now can you repeat the first part of your question again? Sorry.
Claro. Primero, ¿qué opina del tema de la, digamos, del lenguaje que se está utilizando y la forma de referirse?
Sí, gracias. Muy buena pregunta. El lenguaje que se ha utilizado de ambos del gobierno federal y del gobierno estatal es lenguaje y retórica inflamatoria, ofensiva y entendida con el propósito, porque es una táctica de gobiernos autoritarios de hacer a otros grupos vulnerables, como migrantes, a verse como personas malas, como personas que no merecen el respeto, la dignidad humana que los demás. Estas tácticas de usar lenguaje ofensivo, discriminatorio contra estos grupos, llamándoles enemigos, terroristas o lo que sea, es intencional. Y hay que estar al tanto de ese lenguaje, porque esas son evidencias y signos de las tácticas autoritarias que se están aplicando en Texas. Y es una manera para convencer a los medios y al público de que cierto grupo no merece los derechos de los demás. Ahora, esa no es una visión de Texas que tenemos nosotros en ACLU. Nosotros tenemos una visión en que todas personas, no importa el lenguaje, el color de la piel o de dónde vengas, tienen el derecho de permanecer, de tener dignidad, de ser tratados con respeto y estar seguros en sus lugares. Entonces, para nosotros, este lenguaje, estas problemáticas, porque al fin del día implica una visión que no es democrática, una visión que es contra los principios de justicia y igualdad.
Gracias.
¿En
Y la
inglés?
segunda pregunta estaba relacionada bueno, no sé si quieres responder en inglés primero.
Está bien, está bien.
Pero la segunda pregunta estaba relacionada con cuál es el tipo de documento oficial que se debe portar para, digamos, una persona que tiene una visa. Tiene que llevar su pasaporte consigo, y una persona que es residente o ciudadano, ¿es suficiente con tener la licencia de conducir? A ver, también hay que tener en cuenta que la licencia de conducir es un es un documento que ha sido fácilmente falsificado. Entonces, no sé si este sea alguna forma como, digamos, que tenga, que influya en la verificación de esto.
Sí, eso es muy buena pregunta. Y la realidad es de que no se sabe exactamente qué documentación va a ser suficiente en los encuentros con la policía. Ahora, si uno es ciudadano o residente o forma de identificación que pueda confirmar eso, para todas personas, aunque uno no tenga estatus legal, si tiene una forma de identificación, eso también es importante, aunque sea de su país natal. Todas personas, al ser detenidos, tienen derecho de comunicarse con sus consulados. Y esa forma de identificación, de identificar el país de dónde viene uno, va a ser importante para poder reclamar esos derechos consulares también. Entonces, lo que le puedo decir es de que no se sabe exactamente qué se va a necesitar porque cada policía y cada interacción puede ser diferente. Todas las agencias aplican diferentes prácticas, tienen diferentes agentes, pero lo único que se puede hacer es estar preparado lo más posible.
Podría sumar una cosa más, frente a, ¿creen ustedes que esto es un tema de contra la inmigración ilegal o contra la inmigración per se, teniendo en cuenta que cuando que la semana pasada se estableció que era considerado criminal incluso quien no tenía el permiso de estadía dentro de Estados Unidos? Y ya con eso cierro, pero le pido que por favor también me confirme que podemos usar esto para publicación de noticias. Gracias.
Sí, para empezar, sí se puede usar esto para utilizarlo en noticieros. El permiso es dado para este video. Pero, ¿puede repetir la última pregunta, por favor?
¿Qué opina con el tema de que sea considerado, digamos, que se le llame criminal a quien está aquí sin documentos, que, digamos, sea considerado al mismo nivel de una persona que tiene antecedentes por homicidio u otro crimen?
Sí, es buena pregunta. Para empezar, el uso de términos como criminal o ilegal para describir a personas migrantes es parte de lo que estábamos hablando anteriormente. Son tácticas para deshumanizar a personas. Porque para empezar, muchas de las personas que vienen a Texas, que son migrantes, vienen porque son refugiados, vienen porque tienen derechos de asilo. Y la manera legal para llegar a este país es pisar territorio estadounidense. Entonces, es falso creer que automáticamente porque alguien no tiene documentos es ilegal, al contrario, para estar aquí para pedir ese proceso. Entonces, por definición, esa persona no es ilegal. Y hay muchas cosas así que se desconocen de la ley migratoria. Nosotros somos abogados de derechos civiles, no somos abogados de ley migratoria o de derechos de inmigración. Ni las autoridades policiales tienen esa experiencia. Entonces, al asumir que alguien es ilegal simplemente porque no tiene los documentos que uno pide, no quiere decir que están aquí quebrando alguna ley o porque no deben de estar. El usar términos como ilegal para describir a migrantes es racista, es discriminatorio y es una táctica de gobiernos autoritarios.
All right, thank you, Edgar. We have a question that says Texans, earlier Nick said Texans support basing pretrial release on safety rather than on their wealth. What specific reforms do we have for the bail system, Nick?
So Texas has two systems of justice, one for the rich and one for the poor. And if you're wealthy, you go free and you're innocent until proven guilty. And if you're poor, you stay in jail before trial. And so what bail reform means is reducing the role that money plays in whether you are stuck in jail or not. And some of the specific reforms that can help accomplish that, we need to reduce the use of monetary bail and replace it with a system where judges are able to decide whether to detain or release people on a case-by-case basis by judging the potential impact on safety and not taking money into account. And none of the proposals up to now have really rooted out the problematic role that money plays in our current pretrial system. We also need to ensure that that we use jail as a last resort to ensure community safety and not, as it currently is used, as basically the norm. And then I'll also just add, we need to ensure that the entire state has good pretrial supervision tools, education, counseling, text message reminders to help people get back to court and not get arrested on new charges.
Thank you, Nick. We have time for, just a few more questions. Please feel free to put them in the chat or in the question and answer function.
Christine, may I add one more thing? We,
Yes.
we just published like a primer on bail issues that I think will be really helpful for reporters to understand the issue. And we'll share it in the chat in just a moment as a resource. And if you have any questions on this issue, please feel free to reach out to us and we can be a help.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. This is last call. Okay, hold on. I see one hand up. You may ask your question. Mara?
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, raised by mistake.
Okay, I'm not seeing any additional questions, so we can wrap this up. Again, I just want to thank you all for taking the time to join this press call. Again, this was recorded, and so if you are going to need the video link to this press call, you can reach out to our media email, and that's going to be media@aclutx.org. My colleague just put that in the chat, and so you can reach out to that if you need the link. Of course, it's going to take a few minutes for it to download, and then we can send that over. But again, thank you all. We appreciate your time. And if you have any additional follow-up